Welcome everybody to Visas and Citizenship, Making Sense of U.S. Immigration Documents and Processes. Today our presenter is Jennifer Juarez, and today is October 21st. My name is Olga Escamilla, and I'm going to be your host. I also have two of my colleagues here, Liz Moya and Anne-Marie Molinari, so you may see messages in the chat from them. So just keep an eye on the chat. They're here to help us backstage. So thank you all for being here. And I'm going to go ahead and continue. I want to welcome our presenter for today, Jennifer Juarez. Jennifer is a transplant from the Midwest to the South. She came to San Antonio in 2017, and she started working with the Northside Adult Education Literacy Program in the spring of 2018. Currently, she works as one of adult educators for both ESL and HSE classes, and as one of their two career navigators. So welcome, Jennifer. And Jennifer, I'm going to stop sharing so you could begin. So thank you for sharing with us.
Sure thing. Thank you for inviting me, Olga. So let me go ahead and make sure I have this on right. And I will go ahead and full size my screen. Can everybody see?
Yes, ma'am.
All right. So today's presentation is Vis-a-Vis, Visas and Citizenship, Making Sense of U.S. Immigration Documents and Processes. So this presentation came about between me and my co-navigator, where we were meeting with students that had certain visas. And as career navigators, of course, we want to help them transition from education into work, as that is part of our program's objective. But we realized pretty quickly that a lot of the teachers that we work with and a lot of the students who have the visas weren't entirely sure of what their visas allotted them to do, or what they could do with their visa if there was something else that they were seeking to do with while here in the U.S. So going and getting started, what I'd like to do is go ahead and let you guys know some of the objectives that I have for you today from this presentation, and what we're going to cover, and sort of what you should be able to do when we finish. So one of the first objectives is being able to differentiate between rights that are available to citizens and non-citizens. So with a lot of the things that have been happening in the past couple of years, we definitely wanted to make sure that all of our students, as some are non-citizens, were aware of all of the rights that were available to them and those that they may not be eligible for. I'd also like at the end for you to be able to evaluate and educate your students or your staff on the different types of visas that we're going to cover, including their allowances and their limitations. And really the last thing, my goal at the end of all of this, is that you all will be able to apply knowledge of the visas that you cover here with us today to better assist your students or your staff in transitioning them to work or to study. So with those objectives in mind, we'll go ahead and we'll get started talking a little bit about basic rights. So in this section, I'd like to give you guys a minute or two to think about some of the rights that you are aware of that are afforded under our Constitution and other laws and statutes for both citizens and non-citizens. So if you want to take a moment to think, and then you think you have some answers, you can feel free to type those in the chat.
I'll let you know as they start coming in.
I imagine there'll be a lot of overlap.
Armando says vote versus non-vote. Mary Frances says citizens can vote. Yes, voting, citizen can vote. All about voting right now. Yes,
course,
definitely voting, right to a speedy trial, buying a house, trial by jury, freedom of education and medical. Non-citizens cannot vote. Voting, yeah. So a lot about voting. Yes, thank y'all.
Alrighty, thank you guys. So yeah, a lot of those are some of the ones that I'm going to cover, in addition to a few others that were not mentioned. And I did hear some that were briefly mentioned, and we'll get into those. Sorry, I got to click on the screen here, and we'll get into those as we go through them. So one of the ones that most people know about, and I'm actually surprised I didn't hear this one because this is the one all my students knew, was the first right I'm going to cover, which is the freedom of religion, religious practice, free speech, and/or press, which is covered under your First Amendment rights. So in this way, Congress cannot prohibit the freedom of religion or religious practices, nor can it censor speech or press, and that extends to both citizens and non-citizens. So you're going to see as we go through these that most of the rights in the Constitution are really just general limitations on government power and not special protections for any specific group of people. And not only does the U.S. Constitution grant non-citizens most of the same rights as citizens, But there have been previous Supreme Court rulings in the past that forbid many state laws from discriminating against aliens specifically. So that's one of the first ones. The second one that I want to talk about is protection against unreasonable searches and seizures, which is granted under the Fourth Amendment. And that's the right of people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures. The third one that I'd like to cover with you guys, private property cannot be taken unless fair compensation is paid. This is actually a part of the Fifth Amendment rights, which guarantees that a person's private property can only be taken by the government for public use if fair compensation is paid. And then another right that's applicable to both citizens and non-citizens is the other part of the Fifth Amendment right, which is your right to remain silent. So all people have the right to protection against self-discrimination. And I'm sure you remember when there was a lot going on with those ICE raids, this was a really important one we wanted to talk about with our students, specifically those of us that may have students in our program who are not necessarily considered legal, allowing them to know what their rights are. The next right that I wanted to cover that's available for citizens and non-citizens, and someone did mention this, is your right to a jury trial and your right to counsel. That's covered as part of the Sixth Amendment rights, that all people have the right to a speedy and public trial and the assistance of legal counsel or aid. Now, there is something important to note regarding this, and you will all see that there is a resource at the end of the presentation, but I think it's kind of important to mention right now that as of October 16th, 2020, the American Civil Liberties Union, the American Immigration Council, and the National Immigration Litigation Alliance, along with Simpson Thacher and Bartlett, LLP, are continuing to challenge the Trump administration's decision to expand the scope of expedited removal. Expedited removal is the process in which anybody who was found, I believe it's within 100 miles of a border, without documents, could not prove that they had been here for more than 2 weeks, was not eligible for a jury trial or a right to speak to anyone. They could immediately be deported. And there has recently been a notice that was sent out to expand this expedited removal process, and it could technically be applied to any non-citizen apprehended anywhere within the United States who had not been permitted or paroled at a port of entry and could not prove that they had been present in the US for 2 years or more. So that's kind of currently developing at this time. But as far as the laws in which they are written, of course, to let you all know as a little disclaimer, I'm not a lawyer. I don't typically give out legal aid. I'm just giving a little bit of general information regarding laws and practices for you to be familiar with. So that's for number 5. And then the sixth right that I'd like to talk about with you all that's extended to both citizens and non-citizens is covered under the Eighth Amendment, which is the protection against cruel and unusual punishment. So if convicted of a crime, no person is subject to excessive fines or cruel and unusual punishments. And again, with the current climate of things that are kind of going on in this regard, technically what is stated within the Constitution and given to those as rights and is not specifically designed only for citizens, all of these should be applicable to non-citizens. Whether or not they are in practice, of course, is something else. So those ones are specifically for citizens and non-citizens. And covering rights that are reserved for citizens, I'm glad that a lot of you were aware of these. So one of the first ones that we wanted to talk about that are reserved specifically for citizens is their right to vote in elections for public officials. And that's covered under the 15th Amendment. The citizens have a right to vote, and the US Constitution prohibits the federal government and each state from denying a citizen that right to vote based on their race, color, or previous condition of servitude. Now, it should be noted that in some counties, depending on the type of election, if it could be a city official or it could be for how funds will be used for education or appointing somebody in charge of a small particular specific job within that city or county, there are a few that may allow non-citizens to vote, but typically overall, most public elections, those are only for citizens. Another right that is applied only for citizens is their ability to submit applications for federal employment requiring US citizenship. So there are a couple of orders. There's an Executive Order 11935, there's an Annual Appropriations Act, and also the Immigration Law Ban that each state in some form or another that only US citizens and nationals, including residents of American Samoa and the Swains Island, may compete for and be appointed to competitive service jobs. And in general, you must be a US citizen or a national to work for the federal government, but there are some exceptions. They may hire a non-US citizen into the accepted service or senior executive service if the Annual Appropriations Act, the immigration law, and the agency's internal policies allow it, and or if they request approval to hire a non-US citizen into the competitive service as no qualified US citizen is available. And then lastly, another right that's only specifically for citizens is to run for elected office. And based on the US Constitution, I'm sure some of you know with election season coming up, there are certain requirements that an individual must have to be able to run for and hold an elected federal office. So of course, only the president and vice president must be natural born citizens. But if you're interested in being a House of Representatives candidate or a Senate candidate, each of those have a different requirement. So the House of Representatives requires that you be a citizen for 7 years and a legal resident of the state you seek to represent. And Senate candidates must be a citizen for 9 years, and same with the legal resident status of the state you wish to represent. So really quick, those are just some brief rights that are extended for citizens and non-citizens if your students ever have questions for you. So now that we've gone over rights, let's go ahead and transition into visas. So visas matter, and you're going to run into a lot of them. I believe at this time there's more than 130 visas that circulate all around. We are definitely not going to cover all 130. That is just too much for 1 hour and too much in general for one sitting. But what I'd like you guys to do is think about if you've spoken with someone before who's had a certain type of visa. Did you know what their visa was? Did they know what their visa was? And maybe if you want to type in chat, I guess you could give an example of one of the visas that you've run into in the past.
Work visa, 5-year visa, F1, work visa, tourist visa, visiting visa within the border, travel visa, visa 9, work visa, student visa, work visa, H1B, ooh, J1, H1B to work, and then student visa.
Yeah, those are typically the most common ones I think I run into are tourist visas, student visas, and temporary work visas.
What's a visa, Armando? Okay, I think he's trying to be funny. So A1 and an A2, sis song.
Oh, that's a special one, yeah. All right, thanks guys for sharing. I'm glad that some of you have mentioned a few of the visas that we'll actually be covering here. Some of the more specialized visas are the less common ones we won't be talking about, but I will try to cover the most common that you're likely to run into as you work here in the US with adult education or adult students. So one of the first ones, there's 2 categories of visas. There's non-immigrant visas and immigrant visas. So the first category we're going to talk about is the non-immigrant visa. And to go ahead and get started with that, I'd like to begin with student visas, because I think these are probably one of the more common ones that you see if you work in a community college or at a university. So the first student visa that we're going to talk about is the F visa. And just some general information, it's a type of non-immigrant visa that allows foreigners to pursue academic studies and or language training programs. So for this, to be able to receive an F visa, you would need a form I-20. And to receive this form, prospective F visa students must apply at the schools they intend to enroll in to receive it. And once they receive the approval for this form, they will get a tentative expiration date on their I-94 form. And an I-94 kind of works like a check-in, check-out ticket, where it tells you the length of time that you'll be staying, wherever you'll be staying. And regarding the duration of stay for these types of visas, students with F visas usually must maintain a full-time status at whichever program, school, or university in which they're enrolled, which for us, if we think about college, that typically translates to about 12 credit hours. Regarding coming to the US and starting your program, there are periods of time considered grace periods that are allotted for these students on these visas. They can typically come to the US about 30 days before their program begins, and they have this nice little thing called a grace period at the end of their program. And for F visa holders, it's 60 days after their program ends that they can then transition from the US back to their home country. So Some of the benefits for this visa is that they may engage in on-campus employment. We're going to call those CPT and OPT, and I'll differentiate between the two. CPT is curricular practical training, which is defined as employment considered an integral part of an established curriculum. So that can include things like alternate work, study, internships, cooperative education, or any other type of required internship or practicum that is sponsored by an employer through agreements made with a school. And it has to be in relation to your major, what you're studying. An internship, on the other hand, they would consider that OPT, or optional practical training, and that's usually defined as a temporary work authorization, which allows students to gain real-world work experience related to their field of study and up to a period of 12 months, though it may have some restrictions. So the big difference between the CPT, the curricular practical training versus the optional practical training is that optional practical training does not require a job offer or employment, but does require authorization. The curricular practical training does require a job offer or employment sponsorship, and that usually has to be hosted through the school. As you attend university for an F visa, the other benefit is that you may earn a degree or credit towards a degree while you're studying. The next visa I'd like to talk about is a J visa. And somebody mentioned that they ran into one of these. So this is another type of student visa, but it comes with some different conditions. So regarding the J visa, basic overview, it's a type of non-immigrant visa that allows foreigners to pursue academic studies, language, or training programs. Sounds a lot like the F visa, but a little bit different. So the difference between this one, it uses a different form. You're going to need a DS 2019 provided by a program sponsor. Whereas with the F and M visas, as you'll see, those you can apply to once you've applied to a university. Now, this type of visa is intended for people to gain skills in the US and take them back to their respective home countries. So the duration of stay is really dependent on the length of program that you're enrolled in. Some can last up to only 6 months, and others may be as long as 10 years. The types of programs which issue these types of visas are meant to promote cultural exchange, and categories for those might include things such as au pairs and educare, camp counselors, government visitors, interns, international visitors, physicians, professors, research scholars, all these different professions, which are usually roundabout found in education or childcare. Now, regarding the benefits for this, right, you may earn a degree or credits towards a degree, and you may also engage in part-time work on campus, but you are not allowed to engage in curricular practical training or optional practical training with a J1 visa. And another key difference between this and the F visa is that although this visa will allow you 30-day entry prior to your program starting, it has a shortened grace period for students, 30 days rather than 60 days. And another important thing to note, the J visa also confers this, I kind of call it a mean little clause that sneaks in there. Anybody who enters the US under a J1 visa is required to return home for at least 2 years before coming back to the US. It's called the home residency requirement. This home residency requirement does not extend to the other student visas, and anybody who comes with a J visa holder as a dependent is also subject to this requirement. Now, it should be noted that it is possible for individuals who meet certain criteria to waive that home residency requirement, but you'd have to complete a different form and receive authorization to be able to not be held accountable for that 2-year return home. So that's a J visa. And let's go ahead and move on to M visas. M visas are another type of student visa, but this one's different from an F and a J. Basic overview, and what sets it apart is that instead of being enrolled in any kind of academic program, you're actually enrolled in a vocational or technical school program. So applicants for these visas would fill out a form I-20 just as they would for the F visa, and you would also have to apply to a school and show proof that you're going to this school to be able to receive that form. And then, same as with the F visa, 30 days before your program starts and 60 days after your program ends, Your duration also depends on maintaining full-time status, just as with the F visa. But there are some big differences between the M and the F visa. Holders of an M visa must prove that they can cover the expenses for the entire course of their studies, which could be anywhere from 1 to 3 years. And this is not required with the other two student visas, the F or the J. Right? This is unique only to M visas. So often students will attend a community college or a junior college that provides vocational or technical training and awards associate degrees or other secondary education certificates, a vocational high school, a trade school, or a school of non-academic training other than language training. So some of the benefits for this is that you can attend those vocational or technical schools and that you may engage in optional practical training. So this one, when you do engage in optional practical training, you're only allowed to engage in those post completion of your program, but it's for a limited duration versus the F visa where you might be able to get an extension. So otherwise, you're not allowed to engage in on-campus employment, but you can engage in this type of internship after the program. So that's a little bit about the student visas. I know it was quite a lot just for 3 different visas, but if anybody had any questions regarding just those student visas specifically, now would be a great time to ask them if you have them.
There are a few questions. So let me go back. And Deborah said, and this was when you were asking about different visas, and she said, someone said a green visa. What's that?
Ooh, a green visa.
I don't know. I have no idea. So, okay. And then Tiffany Lee put a link in for information on the directory of visa categories. And Helen says, do students need to be enrolled full-time in college for this type of visa?
Specifically for any student visa or just for?
It was during one of them. I think it was on the second one, not the first one.
So because the visa? I think for the J visa, you're more or less enrolled in a program, and that program itself confers its own status of allowing you to be there for that visa, because there's no real full-time measurement, especially if you're somebody who's participating in, say, like a camp counselor program. The length of that program and you being enrolled in it would confer your status.
Okay. And then somebody said, Beatriz said, what visa prevents a student to enroll in an IET? Oh, I think there's more to come, right?
Yeah, there are definitely some more visas that we're going to talk about. And regarding IETs, I think it would extend to knowing whether or not that IET was paying somebody or giving them a type of paid compensation for their time in a program.
Okay, and then Armando says, can you work with any type of visa or a certain type of visa?
Ooh, only with certain type of visas, sir.
Okay.
and that's sort of what we're getting on now.
Okay, so you're going to continue with that. And then the last question that's come through is, can a student work under a student visa?
It depends on their type of student visa. So a J visa definitely allows for on-campus part-time work. An F visa, if approved, would allow for a student to have on-campus or school-sponsored part-time work. But an M visa, on the other hand, does not allow for the curricular practical training or part-time on-campus work.
Okay, and then Diabata says, I think it was a green card. So what is a green card?
Oh, the green card. That's the permanent residency card for somebody who's applying for citizenship.
Okay, so it's different from a visa.
Yeah, okay. And that's why I was like, I don't think I've ever heard of a green visa, but I was going to say, does she mean a green card?
Okay, so it's for someone who's applying for.
Yeah, that's the permanent residency card that you would see. It grants a non-citizen the ability to gain permanent residence here in the United States.
Okay, thank you. I think that's it.
No problem. All right, so let's go ahead then and we'll transition to the actual temporary work visas, because remember, student visas, those typically only allow for on-campus work. And I say that specifically because you may have a J visa, but you can't just walk off campus and get a job at Starbucks. All of these have to be through your school. Now, when you have a temporary work visa, on the other hand, and I'm glad that somebody had mentioned they've run into this one before, because it's one of the visas I see the most commonly, is the H-1B visa. And just some general information, it is also a type of non-immigrant visa, And I'll just put a little disclaimer. It could also be dual intent, and we'll talk about dual intents later as we get on to other visas, that allows a U.S. employer to temporarily hire foreign workers in specialty occupations. So the difference with H-1B visas and student visas is that this one must be completely sponsored by an employer who's seeking to hire someone to work here in the U.S. for the length of their visa. This person is dependent on their status as a worker for that employer specifically. So they need to file an I-129 on behalf of the visa holder, which grants a duration of stay from anywhere of 3 years up to 6 years, but can be renewed. So the length of stay is entirely dependent on you remaining hired. And if for any reason, if your employment is terminated or your visa status changes, you're granted a grace period of up to 60 days to find another job or someone else who would sponsor you before changing your visa. So this type of work, when we say specialty occupations, we're usually talking about someone that has very advanced knowledge or work experience, typically a bachelor's degree and up. And some examples of applicable professions that might be included in this are accountants and auditors, architects, biologists, budget and management analysts, chemists, civil engineers, college and university educators, database administrators, electrical and electronic engineers, financial analysts. The list it's pretty extensive, but most of the students who you'll run into, they'll already be a professional established in their home country when they receive this type of visa. Some of the benefits for this type of visa, obviously, the biggest one is being allowed to engage in paid employment here in the United States. They also have the capacity to bring immediate family members over to the U.S., but only as dependents. And we'll talk about those dependent visas in a moment once we finish this. When I talked about it being kind of a dual intent, is that you may also pursue legal permanent residency. Most people who typically get an H-1B visa don't normally come over with the intent to become a permanent resident because they themselves cannot determine whether or not they will be the permanent legal resident. It's whether or not your company will sponsor you to become one. So something that's important to note about this type of visa as well is that while it is highly coveted, there's always a limit on the number of H-1B visas that are issued each year. So I did a little research and digging for you all. During the fiscal year of 2019, 388,403 visas were approved. So there were more than 400,000 applicants and only that amount was approved. And another thing to note, with the current pandemic that's going on, that's having us all do these webinars and our lessons and things online, as of June 22nd this year, the president signed a proclamation that has temporarily suspended the processing of certain immigrant and other related work visas. So at this time, that order will remain in effect until December 31st, 2020, but it may be extended depending on the climate of the pandemic as it progresses here in the US. And the reason, if I remember correctly, for doing that was to decrease the amount of competition between available jobs here in the US for those that are qualified for work. So now that we've talked about the H-1B, let's go ahead and talk a little bit about the corresponding visas with the H-1B, and that would be the H-4 visa. This is the dependent visa. So anybody who has this is typically the dependent of somebody who owns an H-1B visa, and this includes the spouse and children under the age of 21. So for this form, for this visa, you'd need to complete the form I-539, or it can be issued at a local consulate. So for this one, your duration of stay is entirely dependent on your H-1B visa holder. So as soon as your spouse's visa is up, if it doesn't get renewed, you're in the same boat with them. There are some limitations and drawbacks to this visa in particular, but I always like to talk about the benefits first. So on the plus side of having an H-4 visa, even if you are a dependent, you may hold a driver's license, you can open bank accounts, you will receive a taxpayer ID number, you can enroll in academic studies and language programs. And this is a really cool one because being an H-4 holder actually allows you to enroll in local universities as though you were a resident. You may not necessarily be eligible for financial aid. but you would receive that in-state residency discount that any other person would living in the same area as you, applying to the same school. And with an H-4 visa, you're also allowed to transition the status of it to any other non-immigrant category. So if you wanted to actually transition your status to a student visa, you're welcome to. A tourist visa, I don't know why you would, but you could. Some of the negative drawbacks, though, unfortunately, for an H-4 visa holder is that you are not allowed to work. You are not eligible for a social security number. And while you can pursue those academic studies, you're not entitled to part-time work as well, because that's the type of paid compensation which is really limited on the H-4. And another note, along with the H-4 visa, as of May 26, 2015, USCIS did authorize H-4 visa holders to apply for EADs, which are employment authorization documents. But this was only for certain H-4 visa holders, and it really depended on their spouse. They both, the H-1B holder and the H-4 holder, had to satisfy two very specific criteria. Now, although it is possible for this visa to apply for an EAD or that employment authorization document, it's a very difficult and complicated process because it's kind of been in and out of courts since 2015, since it was passed, because immediately following that release immediately following the ability for H-4 holders to be able to apply for documents to work, there was a lawsuit that was filed that was saying that it wasn't protecting the rights of U.S. workers, and instead increasing the pool of workers that were looking for jobs. So you could technically do this, but it's a very long, drawn-out process at this time. So that's a little bit about H visas. I think those are the most common ones that I run into overall. Did you have any questions about H-1B visas or H-4 visas?
Yes, there were a couple. So the first question, I think it was for the very first one, H-1B.
Mm-hmm.
Does the company pay for it?
Yes, your company typically sponsors you and covers the costs of that visa and the processing. Now, whether or not they'll pay for you to come over here, that's a whole other thing.
Okay, and then Pedro said, and this might just be a comment, permanent residents only approved under labor certification for some professions.
Mm-hmm. So H-1Bs, there's also a lot of lawsuit and talk about who should be allowed to come over to the U.S. to have certain positions. There are only certain professions which are recognized to grant H-1B visas or to request them. So you typically have to work in a very specific profession. I know IT is a big one that they usually pull workers over here for, and then engineering as well. So it's normally an advanced profession. You would never see somebody who didn't have an advanced degree carrying an H-1B.
Okay, and then there's another question. Can they switch to an H-1B visa after already entering the U.S.? I guess maybe with another type of visa.
Yes, actually, that is possible. But remember that with an H-1B, it's definitely important that you have someone sponsor you. If no company or employer is willing to sponsor you, then it's not possible to gain that H-1B status. But it is common for people to come to the United States on a different type of visa, and typically a tourist visa, and come for a job interview and then receive a sponsorship.
Okay, very good. I think that's all the questions for now.
All right, excellent. So I apologize, information overload, guys. We still have a few more. So now I'd like to talk about tourist visas, which is another common visa that we see. So for this visa, basic overview, it is a type of non-immigrant visa issued to immediate family members, spouse, and children under 20. It's a non-immigrant visa issued by the U.S. government to foreign citizens seeking entry into the U.S. for a temporary period of time. And for this one, you normally see it when somebody comes to the U.S. on a vacation or to visit family and friends, or for any other purpose that doesn't involve employment. So for this particular visa, you would be required to have a DS-160 form, and you need to prove when you complete this form that you have the intent to return to your home country once your visa expires. If you're unable to prove this, and don't get approved during your first application, there's no penalty for reapplying, but you would have to pay a processing fee again. So it's very important that there's no preconceived intent of you coming to the US for any other reason than enjoyment, vacation, or a very specific purpose. And we'll talk about those different types of professions. The duration of stay for tourist visas is up to 180 days or 6 months, and some tourist visas can be valid for up to 10 years. Now, some visas have restrictions on the limit of entries that you can have into the United States. They might only have 1 or 2 entries. Some may have multiple entries. So you'd really need to see the document to be able to let your student or your friend know, how many times they're allowed to enter, how long their visa lasts for. Regarding that, the purpose for these visas, these are often used for visitors to participate in certain professional services or programs. So some of the things that they can do as a professional service would be to hold business meetings, purchase materials, perform independent research, take photographs, go to interviews. You're also eligible to perform missionary work or give religious instruction. You can travel within the US to visit friends and family. Some people use these to obtain medical treatment, which may only be available here in the US. And you can enroll in courses of study that do not offer credit. So any of our local programs that we might have, you'd be able to enroll in those. Some folks also use this in substitution of a K visa to enter as an unmarried partner of a non-immigrant visa holder. So there's loads of different reasons why somebody might use a tourist visa to come visit the United States. But there are some prohibited activities when you do come here on a B visa. And the biggest one of all would be employment, both paid and unpaid. You are not eligible to be hired in any capacity. You can receive education, but not anything that awards a degree or a certificate. So somebody had mentioned asking about IET programs. If you had a student on a B visa, this may be one of those students that you cannot enroll in that IET program because they can't receive any type of credit for the course they enroll in. But if it's a community ed program, say a baking class or a painting class, that's recreational and they can definitely do that, no problem. It is possible as well, as I had mentioned before, that if you have a B visa, you can transfer this status. Some folks do transfer it over to an H-1B, and some folks do transfer these over to student visas, F or M. But it is important that we talk briefly about preconceived intent. And if, when you're filing your documents and forms to transition the status of your visa, you have to prove to USCIS that when you came here on your tourist visa, you did not have the intent to stay here long term. So normally when you apply for those changes here in the United States, it's a much more difficult and longer process versus if you had applied for the other type of visa outside of the US. So any quick questions on tourist visas? I know I'm going to have to stop asking questions shortly.
Yeah, there are a couple. So could a person have more than one visa?
No, I don't believe so.
It's either one or switch to another potentially if they can. Okay, and then Carolina says, what about ESL GED for Visa B?
For Visa B. You could definitely enroll those students in your programs. I think it would just depend on what your program's goal is. So since most of the adult education programs, and specifically the one that I know I'm partnered with, we always have grant funding that's given to us with a goal. And the goal is to make sure that we can transition those students who enroll in our programs into employment opportunities or training opportunities. So it would kind of depend on the length of time of your program and what your program's goal is, whether or not it would be a good idea to have that student join your program or possibly refer them to another program, one that maybe doesn't have such a specific mission or is more of a general community course that's offered for anybody in your area.
Okay, and then I think this is the same. Can someone with a B visa take HSE or ESL classes without penalty?
They could. I mean, they certainly could. It would really just depend on your program's views on having somebody who is a temporary visitor here in the United States being a part of your program. Because remember, these visas are only good for 6 months stay at a time. So if your program exceeds 6 months, you may not have that student for the entire time you're running your courses, either for testing or for anything else that you plan to do with those students.
Okay, and then is there more than one B visa, like a B1, etc.?
I believe there's a B2, but I'm trying to remember what the distinction was between the B1 and the B2. I can definitely take a look at that for you later and reply back.
Okay, and that's all.
All right, so I think I'm gonna have to skip the questions because we're running out of time, and I want you guys to be able to apply this knowledge. You've sat here so patiently. So really quick, we'll skip through TN visas and L visas. So TN visas, this is a special type of non-immigrant visa that's issued by the US government to Mexican and Canadian citizens only with particular professional skills. So for this visa, you'll need to fill out an I-129 form, which looks familiar. And again, this is the form that must be sponsored by an employer. So citizens in Mexico and citizens of Canada both need to show that they have an employer who is willing to sponsor them for this visa. There are other criteria that they must meet, but each is dependent on where you're from. The duration of stay, the maximum time you can stay in the US on a TN visa is 3 years. If you wish to remain longer, you can seek an extension, but it must be filed on behalf of you from your employer. It is important to note that there is no grace period for TN visa holders. As soon as your visa expires, you must return to your home country. This type of visa covers 60 different professions, very similar to the H-1B visa professions, accountants, architects, biochemists, computer systems analysts, and so on. Some of the benefits of this is that your spouses and dependents are eligible to stay in the US. There's specific visas, a TD1 and a TD2, depending on if you're from Canada or Mexico, but they are dependents on you and are not entitled to work. However, they are entitled to study, and their visas can be renewed indefinitely with yours. The TN visa is important to note that it is not a dual intent visa. Dual intent visas are defined as visas which allow foreign nationals to be temporarily present in the United States with the intention of possibly immigrating to the US permanently. The only two types of dual intents that are in this presentation are the H-1B that we talked about before and the next visa that we're going to talk about in a second. It should be noted that some employers prefer TN visas because they require less paperwork and documentation versus H-1Bs. So speaking about immigrant visas, and I apologize, we're going a little quick now. Speaking about immigrant visas, the L visa, this is known as a dual intent visa, and it's issued by the US to foreign citizens working for multinational corporations in some kind of executive or specialized capacity. So this one does require that an employer complete a form I-129 on your behalf because it is considered the dual intent. Your duration of stay is dependent on your own country's agreement with the US, and it is subject to reciprocity. So it really depends on what your own country's rules are, how the US will treat you, and this has been in effect since 2012. All L1 visa holders are subject to this condition. So if your country, for example, offers 5 years to American citizens under a similar visa program, you are then allotted 5 years here in the United States. Some benefits of this is that spouses and dependents are entitled to study if you are an L1 holder, and L2 spouses, but not their minor children, are entitled to open market work for 2 years at a time after filing for an employment authorization document. As that little clause for EADs is built into the L visa, this one is a little bit better than the H4 visa and one of those coveted visas as well. I want to say that for this one specifically, though, it should be noted that it's mostly for multinational corporations and executives. So you have to have a very specialized capacity to receive this type of visa. So with that in mind, having gone through TN and L visas very quickly, let's go ahead and transition to the last part of this presentation, which is about you and applying the knowledge that you guys have learned from today's presentations. So in this section, I believe Olga is going to put you guys in some breakout rooms, and depending on how many people we have, there could be 5 or 6 people in your room. You will work with your group and read a sample case study. This sample case study is based on the types of conversations that I have with my students when they come and they visit me. They kind of tell me their hopes and their dreams, and we talk about what their visa status or resident status is. And then I see what I can do to assist them to get to their goal. So You will have a brief story. Olga, did we have a PDF for them so that everybody can see the story and the questions?
I think we made that, didn't we?
I thought we had a PDF file for everyone so everybody's able to see their own copy of the story and the student.
The only thing is that the file is not available, like in terms of.
Oh no. Well,
So go ahead and put the story. Okay, go ahead and go through the instructions and put the case study up.
sure. So for this case study, you all can see it's about a lady called Lourdes who's lived in the United States for 2 years. Her spouse holds an H-1B visa for specialty workers, which means she has an up-to-date H-4 visa. Her husband's job provides enough money to live comfortably, but Lourdes would like to have a job of her own. She has already begun the process of certifying her educational credential from her home country and is creating a new resume in English to highlight her previous work experience. So that's a little bit about Lourdes's background. And these are some questions that I'd like you guys to talk about with your group now that you know some about her situation. Can she get a job with her current visa? Why or why not? And what's an example of one way she could get a job? And what are some benefits of her current visa? So what we'd like to do is send you guys to breakout rooms so that you can work with your partners and come up with answers to these questions. And we'll give you, I want to say about 5 minutes or 6 minutes to do this. Should be enough time.
Okay, and what I'll do is I'm going to copy I'm going to do 6 minutes. So I copied the case study into the chat. So if you want to copy that, because I think it'll go away once I send you to the rooms. So it's in the chat. Because somebody said, can you show the case study? So go back to Tiffany, can you go back to the case study slide?
Oh,
so I've also
absolutely.
placed it in the chat so you can capture it real quick. So we're going to do 5 minutes and then you'll get a countdown option to come back. Well, maybe let's do 4 minutes. All right, everybody. So I'm going to send you all to your rooms. If you'll talk about this case study and respond to the questions. Hi, everybody. Come on back. Don't forget to turn off your cameras and mute. Thank you for participating.
I hope it was enough time. Even though it was short.
I know it was a short time. We're running out of time. So thank you. All right. I think everybody should be back.
All right. I wasn't sure how you wanted to do this, if we should let them raise their hands and then choose them to speak out loud, or if you wanted to have them type their answers in the chat.
Yeah, if your group is ready to share, then you raise your hand. Many details, yes, Joseph, many details to absorb, you are correct. So if you're ready to share, raise your hand and I will unmute you or ask you to speak about what your group determined. I don't see any hands. And the hand is in, oh, somebody said, yeah. Okay, Beth. All right, Beth.
Okay. All right. Okay, I'm unmuted here. All right, yes. So she has an H-4 visa. So that means that she is not eligible to work. So she can't get a job with her current visa because she of that kind. Now, an example of one way she could get a job, she can get maybe pursue education and perhaps work on campus, we were thinking. Maybe she could get a job that way if she were a student. And benefits of her current visa: driver's license, bank account, taxpayer ID. Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. And definitely, as her visa is on its own, she can't work. You are correct that she is eligible to transition her visa over into a student visa and then from either an F or a J visa entitled to work part-time. Absolutely. Were there any other ways that anybody in your groups thought that she could find a job?
Thank you so much, Beth and Beth's group. I think Pedro might have something.
Yes, we were considering that maybe she can find a sponsor that is willing to hire her and apply for an H-1B visa.
Yes, that's fantastic. Absolutely. She totally can do that. If she's a professional herself, then it's technically possible for any company to sponsor her the same way and have her transition her status, just like her spouse. Very good.
She can write a book or start a company on her own.
I do believe that it is possible for somebody with an H-4B to plan for a company. This is always a touchy subject because although you do have a taxpayer ID, you're not eligible for that social security number. So you could start your own, but you definitely can't be hired by anybody existing.
Okay, and then somebody said, confused, why does she need a taxpayer ID if she doesn't work?
You know, I had that same question, and I think it's so that your spouse can file your taxes for you. That was really the only thing that we could come up with, so that you're able to assist your spouse as you file taxes. And if you're married, you file together jointly, just as you would here in the US when married.
And what about agricultural workers and business investors?
As in general, just what about them?
I guess. And then Daniela says, and for the bank account, maybe she needs that number for the bank account.
That could definitely be a possibility. I know, and this I was mentioning earlier while y'all were in the breakout room, that this is actually based off of the case with a student that I've met before in the past. And this was kind of her dream, what she wanted to do. And it's what inspired me to do more research on visas, to be able to assist these students that have these questions so that we can find other avenues for them if it's not possible for them to do specifically what they're looking for. Regarding the other way of employment, one that was not mentioned, just a quick out there, just so that everybody's aware of it, that it does exist. It is still possible for somebody with an H-4 visa to apply for an employment authorization document, but it is a difficult process. So if her husband met certain criteria, she could be eligible for that EAD. So that's all. Alrighty, thank you guys so much. Good job going through the case study. Really briefly, just want to show you guys some of the resources that were used. It's a lot.
And I think I put them in the chat, so they're in the chat for everybody.
Absolutely. Thank you, Olga. And then just thank you guys in general for coming to attend the presentation today. I know it was a lot of information on visas. I do hope, though, that getting a basic overview of some of the visas that you're most likely to run into helps empower you with knowledge when you meet with students, when you speak with other teachers, or they refer you students, or if you just in general for your own benefit, if there's someone that you know who is interested in obtaining a certain kind of visa or curious about what they can do with their visa. And then at this time too, if there were any additional questions, there's a couple of times left, or there's a couple of minutes left.
There was a question. I was reading it and I was muted. So Beatriz says, is there another visa besides the B visa that students cannot enroll in an IET for?
Any of the visas that really prohibit award of credits or award of certifications. So I guess, let me see, the H-4 does allow for it. The L you can work, the TN you can work. I don't believe that anybody's on a TN visa or an L visa would be trying to go through studying. I'm sure there's loads of other visas that exist out there out of the 130. I haven't run into any that are not allowed to be in the IET program at this time versus the H-4 for somebody who doesn't have that employment authorization document, and specifically B visas.
Okay, and then can any visa holder apply for a green card?
You have to meet certain criteria for the green card. Otherwise, it would be denied. I do know it does help if you have a family member or you have somebody help to petition to try to get you into legal status here in the US. But again, it is that whole issue of preconceived intent that if you came here on a certain type of visa and you apply for citizenship or try to receive citizenship, and it looks as though you came here with the intent to get that all along from whatever visa you came off of, you're more likely to be denied. So not every visa holder will be accepted, but could you technically apply for citizenship? You could try, absolutely.
Okay, well, it's 1:30. Thank you, everybody. Thank you so much, Jennifer. Great information, lots of information, but thank you for sharing and thank you everybody for joining us.
Thank you.